field was a radio. And during the entire standoff, the radio was left on as they were hearing updates about what was happening at the bottom of the mountain. Randy began to fear that the government may storm the house in order to end the siege. But he also doesn't want to step out of the house because he assumes they're just going to shoot him. So on August the 26th, the same day that the rules of engagement were loosened, Randy asked to speak to his sister Varnish Joy, who he heard on the radio arrived at the checkpoint. For 2 days, the APC comes up to the mountain and his sister begins to speak with a megaphone, but because the FBI won't let her leave the APC, Randy can't really hear her and she can't really hear him. Because, you know, we wouldn't want these guys to have got an innocent woman killed in the midst of all this, right? On August the 27th, Randy hears over the radio that Bo Gritz has arrived at the bottom of Ruby Ridge. That name probably doesn't mean a lot to most of you, but in the 90s, Bo Gritz was seen as a prominent figure within military communities. Bo Gritz served in Vietnam as a Green Beret, and after the war was over, he was very instrumental in getting prisoners of war and those missing in action out of Vietnam. He started a bunch of campaigns to support veterans, he would tour around to gun shows and stuff like that, and in 1988, he even ran for president. So basically, Bo Gritz was the kind of guy that Weaver would respect. So similar to Randy's sister, the FBI drove him up next to Randy's house in the APC. Bo Gritz tries communicating through the megaphone, says, "This is stupid," and just walks out of the APC. He walks all the way onto the front porch of Weaver's cabin, knocks on the door, and asks to talk. The first time in the midst of all of this, someone just had a conversation. Bo asks Randy what's going on. Bo had been briefed on the situation as far as the FBI had known. Randy responds by saying, "I've been shot, Harris is bleeding out, and Vicky's dead." He immediately gets back in the APC and goes back down to the FBI's command post, where he tells everyone what happened. When the announcement was made that Vicky Weaver was killed by the second sniper shot, the angry crowd that was at the bottom of the mountain turned into a mob. Pressure was mounting fast for the FBI to do something, because so far it looks like they messed up a lot, and if something good doesn't come out of this, they'd be in a lot of trouble. Over the next couple days, Bo Gritz makes trips back and forth from the cabin. As you can imagine, Randy is furious and does not want to come out of the cabin as he's afraid he'll be killed. It's also worth noting, Randy and Harris were so convinced that they were going to die that they had Sarah write up their testimony of everything that went down. So that way, if they die, there will be some evidence of their version of events. Bo assesses the condition of Harris, who is feverish, his wound looks awful, and he's probably got 72 hours left in him. He tells Randy that Randy can take his time and come to whatever terms he wants, but they need to get Harris to the hospital right now. Harris reluctantly agrees and is accompanied by Bo to the bottom of the hill, where he turns himself in at 6:27 p.m. on August the 30th. He's immediately transported by helicopter to a nearby hospital, and after receiving medical attention, Harris makes a full recovery. As soon as Harris surrenders, Bo Gritz, along with a friend of the Weavers named Jackie Brown, come back to the cabin to move Vicky's body. Vicky had been lying in the floor of that house for 9 days at this point. The girls had laid a sheet over her, but the area around was stained black with the carnage of the gunshot. It was a very, very brutal sight, and Randy agreed that to whatever effect can be done at this point, Vicky's body should be taken care of. As Bo and Jackie pick up her body and begin to leave, the daughters plead with him to not let her body touch the ground. When Vicky's body is brought to the bottom of the mountain, there's kind of like conflicting reports as to what the FBI's response is at that point. All of them agree the situation needs to end soon, that this has gone on for too long, but there's disagreement as to what that looks like. Many think that a use of extreme force would be necessary because it's Randy's fault that all of this has transpired. On the morning of August the 31st, Bo Gritz comes to Randy and tells him effectively that the FBI wants this to be over, they're getting hasty, and I don't know what decision they're going to make, but if you come with me right now, I promise nothing bad will happen to you, and I'll walk down there with you together. Randy, destroyed and trusting Bo at this point, takes his daughters with him, and together, the 4 survivors exit the cabin, which means on the morning of August 31st, the 11-day siege of Ruby Ridge finally ended. Randy was arrested and taken to receive medical treatment for his gunshot wound. I didn't really mention it earlier, but the bullet passed clean through on him, so while it hurt a lot, he didn't have a lot of damage to his body. The daughters were taken by the state and eventually sent to live with their grandparents, before after that living with their aunt and uncle, who they were closer to. Both Randy and Harris were arrested and charged for the first-degree murder of Marshall Deegan. Again, the marshal who was shot when all of this began. To give you an idea of how gung-ho the feds were to get a charge on somebody in the midst of this, they briefly considered charging Sarah as an adult and also implicating her in the first-degree murder. However, this idea was eventually dropped. In the media, there was a lot of misinformation that was passed around during this time. For example, it was said that Bo Gritz and Randy Weaver had served together in Vietnam, and that's why Randy went out with Bo. But that's not true. As mentioned earlier, Randy was never in the Green Berets. Actually, come to think of it, that's probably why the false narrative that he was a Green Beret gets passed around so much. Because Bo Gritz definitely was a Green Beret, so if the news kept saying they served together, that would mean Randy was also probably a Green Beret. But yeah, that just didn't happen. Both sides of the argument had extreme perspectives of why this situation began. Sides that were pro-government said that Randy had effectively lured the feds into a trap to try to kill them, while the other side said that the feds planned to assault Randy's cabin that day and kill him and the rest of his family members, which again also didn't happen. And it was a lot of he said, she said leading up to the trial. Defense attorney Jerry Spence took the case. Jerry Spence was known for being a very charismatic kind of showmanship of a lawyer. So when the trial rolled around, Spence had a very unique approach. During the entirety of the trial, Spence did not call forward a single witness. Instead, he just cross-examined everything that the FBI or the marshals or the ATF had done, and that was enough information to win over the jury. During the cross-examination of the ATF, Jerry points out that the ATF informant asked Randy if he could get the agent the short-barreled shotguns, which is entrapment. You can't, as a cop, make someone or ask someone to do a crime and then arrest them for said crime. So he gets that thrown out. On the matter of first-degree murder, he goes over all the details I talked about earlier about what went down at the Y. And it's clear, comparing evidence to testimony, that the agent side of the story doesn't make a lot of sense. Not only were there holes in their narrative, like one agent said the shot started at this moment and another one said the shots actually started at this moment, but they had changed their account so many times that it was easy to poke holes in. He eventually ruled that every action that Randy Weaver, as well as Harris and the rest of the Weaver family took, was reasonable for someone who was randomly attacked by extreme force with no chance to surrender. The trial began on April the 13th of 1993. Randy had been charged with 10 different charges, from the first-degree murder and the short-barreled shotguns I already mentioned, things like conspiracy. Is that a mosquito? To things like conspiracy and resisting arrest and blah blah blah. When the trial ended in June of 1993, Randy had been acquitted for every single charge except the original failure to appear in court. For that charge, Randy was sentenced to 18 months in jail and a $10,000 fine. However, he was credited with time served since he had been in jail for over a year already awaiting trial, and Randy Weaver was released in December of 1993. In the meantime, Harris's shot against Marshall Deegan was ruled as justified and he was let go with full acquittal. 5 years later, when a new local prosecutor came to Boundary County, he tried to prosecute Harris over this shooting again. I guess that the prosecutor was just really mad that he got away with it, but obviously that couldn't go through because double jeopardy. The same FBI hostage rescue team that was at Ruby Ridge would be deployed to another little location called Waco, Texas that same year. In response to this, the Department of Justice had a massive crackdown on FBI operations. They assembled something called the Ruby Ridge Task Force that compiled a 542-page report of the HRT's actions both at Ruby Ridge and Waco. The main things they criticized about Ruby Ridge was the rules of engagement and Horiuchi's second shot. Largely because of the events of Ruby Ridge, rules of engagement have now, for the most part, been standardized across the board. Again, if someone's life isn't in immediate danger, you can't take someone else's. The other thing that they were super critical of, as mentioned, is there was no dialogue or conversation ever opened with Randy before they just started shooting. On top of that, more details came to light. Like, after the first time the marshals were told by Randy to leave the property, marshals were then told by their home office to not try to talk to him again and instead just go through his legal team. You know, the legal team Randy hates and doesn't trust and also doesn't talk to. In 1997, it came out that the chief of the Violent Crimes Division of the FBI had purposefully hidden a report that was critical of the agents at Ruby Ridge, meaning that internally, as the event was going on, the FBI was trying to hide as much evidence as they can. This was noted by both the judge and defense attorney during Randy's trial, as information they tried to get, which was evidence concerning crime scene photos at the Y, to reports of what was said between FBI agents to each other, were either missing or became doctored. Lon Horiuchi has an individual investigation concerning his second shot, to which the feds say they're not going to pursue a case. Later on, the state of Idaho would try to hold a trial for Horiuchi. The trial begins, and immediately the federal government says, since he's a federal agent, this is their case. Idaho passes off the case to the feds, and the feds immediately drop the case. But then a circuit county judge says that feds need to reopen the case, so they reopen it, then it gets transferred to another division, that gets dropped again, then somehow it goes back to Idaho, and after like 3 or 4 flips of Horiuchi being on trial but not on trial, eventually when Idaho gets hold of it, the prosecutor drops the case, saying that it's effectively unwinnable because the government will just keep having them jump through hoops for years and years before they admit any fault. And keep in mind, Horiuchi was also one of the snipers who was stationed at Waco, which if you want to know how I feel about that whole shebang, link in the description. The only real punishment that came out of any of this was the HRT commander, Richard Rogers, was demoted temporarily, but then he continued to politic his way up the ranks, and again, he was also at Waco. In August of 1995, the Weaver family filed a civil lawsuit against the government for the wrongful death of Sam and Vicky Weaver. During the civil lawsuit, for the first time, Randy admitted some level of fault in what happened, saying that if he had behaved differently, this probably wouldn't have had to happen. But, and I agree rightfully so, American citizens shouldn't have to worry about the government or family members over a crime, much less a non-violent crime. The Weavers initially sued for $200 million, and the government, not wanting to make this a whole public publicity thing, what am I saying? Not wanting it to be a very public case, they settle outside of court, to which Randy is awarded $100,000, and the 3 oldest daughters are awarded $1 million each, totaling up to $3.1 million. From here, things began to die down. In 1998, Randy published his own book titled Federal Siege at Ruby Ridge in Our Own Words, which is where a lot of his details of what happened during the siege came to be. Sarah Weaver would also publish her own book over the events, as well as give several interviews and podcast appearances to tell her side of the story. I will say I really like Sarah Weaver. In all the appearances and interviews I've watched of her, she has, for one, a pleasant demeanor, but also she has found a peace about everything that's happened. She forgives the federal government and the agents that were responsible. She has found a more, I'll say, charitable version of Christianity, and doesn't hold hate in her heart for anything that happened, and instead doesn't want people to see Ruby Ridge as a reason to be violent, to do more evil actions, and instead learn from it so we can be better in the future. Now, for as much as it seems Sarah has progressed since the events of Ruby Ridge, Randy did the opposite. It seems, and again, I never knew the guy, but from interviews and testimonies from those around him and things like that, it seems he became very bitter after the events that happened. And while it's perfectly rational to be angry over the events that happened, it seems that he just decided to live in it. To give you an idea of how much he changed, in 2007 there was this protest against taxes that was getting violent and police were showing up. Randy, in between Ruby Ridge and then, would go to a lot of different militia camps or places where there was some kind of government standoff. He would go and help protest. So he was at this tax protest, and someone in the crowd remarked that he might be killed, and Randy said that he wants to die because he's an atheist and just wants to see what happens, which is a far, far cry from the people who wrote letters to the government saying the end times are coming and talking about the judgment of God. To now just say he's an atheist and doesn't care, Again, I don't really, it's hard to have sympathy for Randy given his, I guess, stubbornness, so to speak, that kicked a lot of this off, as well as his own, you know, personal hatreds and whatnot. But it's, I guess it's tragic to see anyone go to waste, right?
Last couple things I want to stop in to mention is, for one, the media's response to Ruby Ridge was as to be expected. Similar to how, as the siege was going on, it was just framed as justified actions on behalf of the government, and a bunch of crazy, you know, radical extremists showed up to protest. So people who oppose that narrative use that as fuel to further oppose media, and things kept going the way they always do. Another massive effect of Ruby Ridge, and its most tragic one, is that of the Oklahoma City bombing. Timothy McVeigh, who carried out the Oklahoma City bombing, was a very loud proponent against the government's actions at Ruby Ridge. So much so that during the trials of Lon Horiuchi, or what little trial existed, he would set outside handing out bumper stickers with Lon Horiuchi's home address. And of course, when McVeigh would eventually commit the attacks of the Oklahoma City bombing, he cited Waco and Ruby Ridge as his reasons for doing so. Again, one senseless tragedy as another.
Ruby Ridge has made its way into so many different aspects of pop culture. In 1996, there was a mini-series about the events of Ruby Ridge, starring Jack Quaid and Kirsten Dunst. In 1999, Peter Rowan made a song called The Ballad of Ruby Ridge. And a lot of different stories, and especially stories involving government overreach, take inspiration from the events of the Ruby Ridge siege. As mentioned, a lot of books were written regarding the events. One of the more popular ones was by a reporter named Jess Walter. The book was titled Every Knee Shall Bow, which the title of that book was actually inspired by one of the signs seen at the Weavers' compound. Years later, Harris would sue the government for damages, and after the government responded that someone who killed a federal agent will never receive money from them, Harris received $380,000. On May the 11th of 2022, Randy Weaver passed away at the age of 74 due to natural causes. And according to those around him, it seems that even at the end of his life, Randy never found peace. With that, we have the end of the Ruby Ridge siege. So, what is there to say about it? Similar to most of these situations involving some kind of government standoff, like Waco, for example, I think it's once again a symptom of hubris. Maybe if at some point he had stepped out, or maybe if during the initial, time that he was wanted for failure to appear in court, he just walked off the mountain. Maybe all of this could have been avoided. At the same time, he shouldn't have to worry that his wife and son will be shot if he doesn't go to jail. On the government side, just as what happens with these government issues over and over again, a failure to admit fault leads to more faults. If the ATF would have told the marshals that Randy wasn't as expressly violent as they made him out to be, maybe the marshals wouldn't have responded with such powerful force. And then maybe if when the marshals passed it off to the FBI, they gave a more accurate accounting of events instead of a series of events that made them look better, the FBI wouldn't have established a kill on sight order. Randy is not where my anger lies in this story. I talk about all kinds of different people on this channel. I talk about serial killers, I talk about cult leaders, I talk about cannibals sometimes. I talk about all kinds of evil people, and there are a lot of evil people out there. The reason I don't worry about them, and 99% of the population doesn't go around worrying about them every day, is because there are barriers and systems in place to protect the good from the bad. Randy Weaver was a dude who lived in Idaho and allied himself with some very wicked people. Those are a dime a dozen. I am not distraught and hurt over Randy Weaver's personal morality or decisions. I'm brokenhearted over my government's bad decisions. If they're to be believed and their purpose is to keep us safe and keep our best interest in mind, then what does that look like when anytime a situation goes bad, they refuse to de-escalate and continue to say it wasn't their fault? If there is no culpability, if there's no admittance to something going wrong, then therefore everything that happened in your mind is the way it's supposed to go. So if that's how you want to be treated, that's how you'll be treated. If they're so desperate to earn the reputation as a hammer willing to dispel any dissent that comes their way, then cool, they've earned it. There should be a sacredcy to the office of our leaders and our protectors. They should not be the lowest common denominator of the population. Both sides of this conflict kept beating their chest over and over to get the other one to back down. And eventually, the federal government did that by killing a young boy and his mother. So, congrats, you win, I guess. Ruby Ridge does not need to have a perfect family who never did anything wrong to be an example of government overreach. Because, as it stands, it is an example of government overreach. The reason I get so fired up about Ruby Ridge, and the reason most people do, isn't because I just hate federal agents or anything. As a matter of fact, most federal agents I've talked to agree that both Ruby Ridge and Waco were tragedies that never should have happened. That's not the official report, is it? The official report is that they dispelled the threat. Mission accomplished. If they're to be looked at as anything other than tyrants, then they have to be better. And the reason that I get so upset about it is because I want us to be better.
I knew I couldn't do this by myself,
I want us to mean
so
something. And Ruby Ridge is an important story to remember so that hopefully we don't make the same mistakes again. But of course, I'm just a YouTuber. I just make funny, goofy videos. So what do I know? But now hopefully you know more now about Ruby Ridge than you did when you started.
This is our only chance.
And if you did, that's great, and I greatly appreciate it. And I just want to say thank you for watching. Really though, thank you all so much for watching. It really does mean the world. Ruby Ridge is something that I've wanted to cover for a really long time, ever since the Waco video, and I've always just kind of kept putting it off. But I just came back around to the story, figured that would be a good time, so hopefully you all enjoy. I really appreciate it. It was weird for me because I went into it under the, I guess, the interpretation most people have of like Randy was a completely innocent guy. You know, the government just preyed on one random guy who made a couple short shotguns. But it was more than that, which again doesn't alleviate the government's actions, but it does paint almost a more tragic picture of the fault on both sides. Anyway, you all heard the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I do want to say, I apologize for the lack of uploads lately. With everything going on in my life, getting married, to starting the 2 new podcasts and stuff, I kind of needed to slow down from here on the main channel for a while just while I got everything in order. But now that I have everything in order, I can definitively say that things are going great. I'm so excited to just full bore pick up the pace with the content again. I've got a lot of great ideas. I say great ideas in my head, they're great ideas. We'll see how they turn out. Hopefully you all enjoy. Thank you for sticking around, and thank you for bearing with me through the lack of uploads. Again, as always, thank you so much for the support. You all have shown me the Creepcast and the Red Thread in the world. Special plug for the Red Thread, because recently we covered Waco on there, so there's more Waco content if you're interested in the sequel, I guess, to Ruby Ridge.
I'm sorry, Mother.
I believe that should do it. Like I said, more content on the way. Check out the merch, as mentioned, in the beanie that's over there. Check it out in the description. Get it while you can. Available for a very limited amount of time. It's gone forever. And I believe that should do it for now. If I can't think of anything else, some links to some of the DOJ reports and stuff like that will be in the description if you're interested in further reading, but you probably knew that at this point. And I believe that should do it for now. But I just want to say, thank you for watching.
Experienced bizarre behaviors across the country last night. Those affected suffered from sudden and intense headaches, a loss of self, and a distinct lack of control of their own bodies. The public are being advised to remain calm but vigilant as local authorities.
This is who you were, who you are.
Hello everybody, today we are going to be talking about one of the most terrifying cases that I have
Now
ever
the nightmare is over.
That is the disappearance
It's time for you,
in Yuba County.
for us.
If you're familiar with
Find a new
unsolved
life.
cases or cold cases online, then you've probably heard this story before. People like The Missing Enigma, Explore With Us, and my boy Nexpo have already made videos covering this case. However, in research for this video, I found that the rabbit hole